Go. Hey, everybody, welcome back. This is the first Strange Mosaic of 2021, and we have a many time returning guests to all of my media, but second time on this show. And the reigning queen of all rabbit holes is with us today. Sofia Smallstorm is here. She has recently had a very good appearance on Higher Side Chats that I recommend everybody go and listen to because it will help set you up for what we're going to talk about here. In that interview, she did touch on this topic of blockchain ID as far as recording people's health and creating personalized medicine. But of course, I would like to go farther and weirder with it. And so please go listen to that excellent interview to set you up for this. And we're going to wander off into the wilderness with this one today. Sofia Smallstorm, welcome back.
Emily, thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me again. And did your grandmother ever tell you that hay is for horses? You don't say hey to people.
No, she didn't tell me that. She told me lots of things, but that might be one of the only things she didn't tell me.
She forgot about it. I know my grandmother always said, hay is for horses, in a very annoyed voice.
All right, I will start with a very formal hello from now on.
No, it's all right. I just thought of that when I heard you say, hey. Yes, so, they are definitely creating our avatar. And I want to tell people my store is Avatar Products, but when I named it that, there was no internet avatar thing going on. And an avatar is somebody with very high ideals, often like a prophet type, like Jesus or the Buddha or Confucius. These were all avatars.
Sofia
And so,
Storm.
no, well, I mean, I wasn't any big deal back then. I just wanted a very kind of spiritual name for my store. So that's what now people think, oh, what do you have to do with James Cameron and the movie Avatar? And why is it Avatar? That's a bad thing. On the internet, in the cloud, your avatar, it's like your face mask, right?
Right. Oh, I'm sure people do all sorts of stuff with you. They probably go, oh, Sofia Smallstorm, are you part of the quiet storm? And blah, blah, all sorts of nonsense. But yeah, I've fallen into some of that stuff too, in terms of like nicknames or titles of things, right? And people who don't look any further than the title think that like I'm invoking some sort of secret connection to something that is dark. And it's like, you people are crazy.
Yes, I know. But the blockchain is a very potentially invasive thing.
Yeah.
I have to say. Although I'm going to do a show with somebody who tells us that there's all different kinds of blockchains. There's good ones and bad ones and tight ones and loose ones. And my gosh, it sounds like a garment, kind of like a hair shirt, an itchy one, a not itchy one.
The blockchain. So I have a friend who, was a very early adopter of cryptocurrencies and blockchain technologies, who I do a lot of shows with, and even some workshops and whatever. And, so he's spent a lot of time like really digging into which ones do what, right? And it is kind of like, it's kind of like understanding the different kinds of like food you can get at the market, right? So there's like, maybe 20 different kinds of olive oil at the market, right? And they're all different. Some of them are cold pressed, some are not. Some are from the first pressing, the second pressing. Some are from really well-grown olives. Some are from factory, right? Like they're all different. They all share certain things in common, like just like all the olive oils are apparently olive oil, whatever. But
no, that's not true.
Well, right. I said apparently, right? Because we've been lied to and told that we're getting olive oil when we're getting other stuff. But let's just pretend for a second that you believe that they're all olive oil. There's still vast differences between them. So in that sense, the blockchain is like stuff is kind of like that. I don't know. Like I have always been like inherently suspicious of it. Like I did a series years ago with, Cliff High, where he was trying to, explain it to me in a way that did, that why it was good. And I was just kind of like, I don't know. But just like our regular money system, it didn't seem to be something that was going away. So, I did take some time to try and understand it and experiment with it a little. And I'm in a place of being kind of like neutral about it. I don't think it's good or bad. I think it's something that simply is. And I think that like there's probably appropriate uses for that kind of technology and inappropriate uses. And so far, my thoughts are that what you're going to tell us about today is inappropriate. But I don't know that as far as for finances, it's any more inappropriate than our current fiat bullshit system, right? So it's a hard thing to say. I'll be interested to hear what you have to say after you do this show with this whoever is going to explain the differences to you.
Well, I'm going to make him explain them to me because I don't understand them well. But I'll tell you this, I'm looking up Alison McDowell's, like a cliff notes she made on her website a while back, and I made a little PDF out of it, which is taking forever to open now. But I am going to read you her very quick, maybe it's like one line explanation of what the blockchain is. But here's the thing, I have always heard that, for instance, the blockchain activity to mine cryptocurrency, whatever that even means,
Right.
consumes a ton of energy,
Yep.
and as much energy as a small country, right? Like Albania or something.
Mm-hmm.
So let's keep that in mind. The blockchain uses a ton of energy, as much energy as a small country.
Yep.
Okay. So what does she say here about blockchain? Blockchain database using decentralized nodes, unerasable, encrypted. So it's just a database. But I had a conversation with Allison yesterday. Do you remember Allison McDowell?
Oh, very much so. You actually are the one who turned me on to her when I read one of your newsletters from last year, and then you've mentioned her here before. I watched her episode of Higher Side Chats, which was the first time I'd like heard her present on a podcast or anything like that. And yeah, no, I love the dexterity of her mind regarding these topics, and I think that I think she's right. I mean, I can understand from what I did with some of these things related to nutrition, what she's done with it related to the capital markets and finances and education and whatnot. And it kind of blew me away. So yeah, I'm very familiar.
Yeah, she's very good. Once you start developing a nose for certain kinds of information, you can really dig into any soil, let's just say. I don't want to mix my metaphors too much. And you can ferret out the threads, like the mycelium, the roots that connect the information you're developing knowledge about to other things where it's hidden, right?
Yep.
And anyway, so I have been learning from watching interviews with Allison and other people. There's another very good resource, Julianne Romanello. I've gotten to know her as well, and we're talking about this blockchain kind of thing. She mentioned to me, and I hope you will understand what this means, because we're seeing it with the election and many other things. Their Agenda 2030 plan is to turn the actual states of America, the 50 states, into larger mega regions that swallow up 2 or 3 or more states.
Yep.
So, for instance, Texas and Oklahoma are part of one mega region in the not so distant plan, right?
Yep.
And Julianne told me that Oklahoma is not going to be a state per se. It will not have any ruling, legislative distinction or power or government. It's going to be a brand. And Texas is going to be a brand. And Oklahoma's logo, its brand logo, is uh, already designed, and it's some blobby thing out of the United Nations paint box of logos.
Right.
So, for instance, California will be a brand. California will be the brand for, fresh vegetables, the beach. This is what it'll stand for. And Texas might stand for a clothing line, a style of clothing. It might stand for oil. It might stand, but it's not going to be Texas the way we know Texas to be anymore. So they are getting us used to, a brand is almost like a sound bite, right?
Yep.
And so they're going to sound bite the states into these brands. And this is will be done generationally. So, on the show with Julianne Romanello, I heard that it was done by Mel.
Yeah, I think it came up in my feed. I haven't listened to it yet, but I think on Veritas. Yeah.
Yes, and used to be a professor at University of Tulsa, which is in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Hmm.
And she is no longer doing that because of the things she learned about the university. And anyway, Mel mentioned, it made me laugh that when he had contact with Charlotte Iserbeet, I
Yeah.
don't know quite how you say her last name, but
You got it right. Yeah.
yeah, she mentioned that what people learned in the third grade, in the days of, let's just call it the Wild West or the pioneers, third grade education was college level education today.
Hmm.
And that was kind of stunning. Um, but that explains why people left school in the sixth grade, because they were the equivalent of PhDs, right?
Yeah.
What was the point of going on? Better to get it back to the farm and start learning how to run things. So, anyway, there's so much to cover here. And I know that I'm kind of talking very basically, but this blockchain thing, this digital ID, the personalized medicine, let's just go to the PCR test. And I don't know if you and I were uh, talking post the last show we did or pre the last show we did, when it was kind of buzzing around the internet that one of the things the PCR test was looking for was this nucleotide string, which exactly matched that of human chromosome 8. Do you remember this?
Yeah. Like I remember, I don't know if you and I talked about it, but I remember hearing about this, a few months back, several months back. And then obviously I was reminded of it when I was listening to your show with Greg.
Right. So do you want me to get into it here, what I kind of have been
Yeah, go.
thinking about?
I think it's
Okay.
important to set
So
up.
human chromosome 8, everybody was saying on the internet, well, duh, everybody's got chromosome 8 if they're a human being, because human beings have 23 chromosomes in double sets. You get a set of 23 from your mother, a set of 23 from your father, and those combine. This is, I think, what is referred to as recombinant DNA, which makes up your genome. Your genome is not the exact same thing, obviously, as your parents. It's yours. It's what identifies you and makes you distinct and different. So, chromosome 8 is the chromosome in human beings that relates to what? I didn't know, and nobody was talking about it on the internet. Even the erudite professionals who were discussing this, nobody explained what it was. So I went to Google, which I actually don't use, but I'm using that term generically, and I looked it up. And it's the chromosome that relates to brain development,
Hmm.
right? So I thought, well, okay, brain development. So this PCR test is pulling out in its sampling of tissue that it takes from you. It's looking specifically for a nucleotide string that makes up your chromosome 8. I said, well, I mean, could it be also looking for other little bits and pieces, snippets of things that relate to your genome, your biological profile, the way you're put together? And then I just kept reasoning in this way. And I said, all right, so when they stick a swab in your nose
Hmm.
and they take a sample of whatever it's pulling, and because it's kind of abrasive and invasive, it's pulling tissue. It's not just mucus that's on there.
Yeah.
So they're getting a good sample of cells. And then they analyze it. They run these cycles, and we've heard a lot about how they're doing overruns of the recommended cycle number, according to Carrie Mullis, who developed the PCR technique and won a Nobel Prize for it. Um, so they're they're over duplicating the material that they get from the PCR test. So again, I'm no biologist, even though some people think I have training. Um, it could be, Emily, that what they're building in their analysis is a genomic profile of each individual who is tested, swabbed. And they want us taking this test often. They keep saying, you know, you could be symptomatic, asymptomatic, blah, 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 from 1 week to the next, carrier, not a carrier. Um, we need you to take this test repeatedly. And so I was thinking, all right, maybe when they take these samples from you repeatedly, they just keep adding them, the analysis of these samples, to the genomic map they're making that is identified by your digital ID on the blockchain. And if you take the test enough, they get to see your genome. They get to see exactly how you're made up. Now, I will mention another rather alarming thing. Somebody sent me an email, this was about a week or two ago, and he said that this element technetium, technetium, this element was in the, I'm going to go to my Skype because I know exactly how to find it in Skype.
Spell that?
What?
The technetium?
Yes, it was on the tip of the swab.
Okay, so this is where I'm going, this is where I wanted to go with you when you were done explaining how you think that this stuff works. And I have a theory I'm going to run past you too, but how did you spell technetium?
Technetium.
All right. Technetium.
So technetium is a radioactive
Yeah.
isotope marker, right?
Yeah.
It's a marker. It's a, what they call it, it's a radio pharmaceutical. Sorry, that's what I mean. When they do scans, they can put a dye or something like that into your body, and it travels through, and then their radio diagnostics, their radiation diagnostics will image you, and they can see the map of something wherever the dye has gone.
Yep.
So like thallium, I think, is one of the things. But technetium is an artificially created radioactive element.
Yep.
As far as I understand it from Wikipedia. And they tip the swab with technetium, and then they jam it up your nose right against the blood-brain barrier. So blood-brain barrier is being injured by this swab that goes this deep with technetium on it, which obviously is going to get through the barrier if they jab the way they do, into your brain. And the technetium is going to start traveling in your brain, and it will be the material by which they can image your brain.
Okay.
So I'll quickly finish up. So then if you have taken the test enough times, you've got technetium swimming around in your brain. And every time you go past a scanner or are scanned in some, official way because of this or that, they've got a nice map of your brain.
Yeah.
Including the most recent update of your chromosome 8, explaining where your brain is at that point in time. That's, a very overly simplistic translation of the development of your brain. But go ahead now with your idea.
Well, so first of all, like it is like this before I kind of go into it, because it's going to take us off into a slightly different direction, although these things are definitely related. Like, I find one of the weirdest things about this whole scenario that we've been in, right, is this testing, right? Like never before. The only time I can remember when people were recommended to take a test for something, right, that they didn't necessarily think that they had, was like when we were experiencing the HIV and AIDS scare, also brought to us by our friend Fauci. That, if you were in a new relationship with someone, especially if you were a gay male, maybe you guys agreed to both take HIV tests before you got intimate, right? That was the only time that I've ever remembered hearing people taking tests for something when they weren't feeling ill.
Yes.
But that was under a very specific set of circumstances at a very targeted population, generally, right? So this idea and how quickly it's been accepted, like I know there's people that test every day, right?
Yeah.
Who tests every week for her job, because my sister works at a university, right? And so she tests every week. I know that you've talked about with some of these athletes testing every day. There's like a variety of different industries where they're requiring either weekly or daily testing, right? And this idea that we constantly are testing for some illness when none of us don't feel, when we I don't do it, but when people feel fine, is bizarre to me. The fact how quickly they've been able to convince everybody that that's normal and that's okay. And like, why, if you felt fine today and you passed the test and you feel exactly the same tomorrow, also with no temperature, why would you need another test? So like, all of this stuff is bizarre. The only way it truly makes like any logical sense is for what you are talking about here, which is a constant monitoring of the brain function, of how things are developing in the brain, right? Of how of all that kind of stuff. Like I think that's like, you know, to me an obvious, right? I had not thought before about people taking, you know, that the results of this test being hooked up on the blockchain, but that makes a lot of sense, especially with during this period of time that they're pushing this idea of getting tested all the time. Blockchain cryptocurrencies are also really rising, and you're right, people are making a lot of money, which is something that gets people excited about the idea of blockchain, right? You can't have
Right,
this.
right. And I'm going to deliver a bomb on that issue in a little while.
Okay, cool. So, you know, these things are, and right now, we're like in the past couple of weeks, right? It has been a boom with the cryptocurrencies. And a lot of us have been observing what's been going on with the virus. And in terms of like, okay, like they're doing this PCR test. They've now acknowledged that they use too many cycles and it's all false positives. So this thing may be coming in the next few weeks where Joe Biden says wear a mask for 100 days. And then suddenly all the coronavirus disappears because you know, because of whatever he did, when really the truth is they stop using the PCR test, and it is, you know, they're able to use that as sort of a psychological operation. But it wouldn't surprise me if along with that, well, just to make sure we can go back to normal, we can stop wearing masks possibly, but the flip side of that is going to be this constant, you know, testing, whatnot, right? And I would almost wouldn't even surprise me if this is the first place where they start doing like giving out social credit tokens, where the more times you take the test, you get some free cryptocurrency, right?
Exactly. Yeah, the incentives are going to be very interesting that they come up with. Now, Emily, um, by the way, I believe that Joe Biden is a brand.
I agree.
Donald Trump is a brand. I mean, the Biden brand of presidency wants to do the right thing when it comes to the coronavirus hazard that's galloping across the world. The Trump brand is reckless and don't care-ish and selfish and blah, blah, blah. So they're creating brands. Um, so yeah, so to continue with this PCR mapping, and what they're really doing is they're putting the jigsaw puzzle, your genomic jigsaw puzzle together, and they're getting right up to the minute information every time you take that test. Now, I use the analogy of going to Home Depot to buy paint, right?
Yeah.
Um, Moderna calls its famous vaccine that it's making, even though it's not a vaccine manufacturer, it's never brought a product to market, they call it the software of life.
Yep.
And the mRNA vaccine is really an instruction book that gets plunged into your body and talks to your cells and tells them how to make proteins in a whole new way, in a non-human way. So I'll get into that in a minute. But you go into Home Depot and there's a wall full of different brands of paints with all the little swatches, those pieces of paper with all the shades, and you have a long, discussion with your wife, and you pick a shade and you take it up to the man at the center console and you say, I want 4 gallons of this brand, this shade. And he says, all right, it'll be 15 minutes. So he sends you off to wander around Home Depot, breathing into your insufferable mask, right?
Yep.
And you come back, and what he's done is he's gone to his spindle. Well, he's gone to his pumps and he's dispensed base material, which he's tinted with different colors, these measures of different colors, a little, you know, raw umber or ochre or whatever to get whatever shade that you want exactly in the right proportions. And then he puts it on a big spindle and he spins the whole thing and he gets you your 4 gallons of paint. That's customized paint that's
Yep.
made right there at Home Depot from a formula. So when you go to get your personalized vaccine, Emily,
Right.
the clinic or wherever you're going will refer to the blockchain and to your genome, and algorithms will have already written a formula for what's to be injected into you to tell your cells exactly how to redo their um, biological creations. So let's to use a very, very rough, crude example. Let's say that you weigh, and I know this isn't true because we weigh almost the same thing, but let's say you weigh 200 pounds and I weigh 100 pounds. And they want to get us both to weigh 150 pounds. And they want every human being to weigh 150 pounds. So, what do they have to tell our bodies to do so that I gain 50 pounds and you lose 50 pounds? Obviously, those are going to be two different kinds of metabolic instructions, right? They
Yep.
might slow my metabolism down and speed yours up so that you shed weight and I put on weight. So, what the aim here, I think, in my little fantasy that I'm creating, is the aim is to standardize human beings. Because once they get human beings standardized in terms of the way they function biologically, then they can slip us into transhumanism, plug us into machine interfaces and whatnot a lot more easily. Because in a factory, you must work with standardized parts. If your part A needs this size screw, then that size screw has to go into part A on the conveyor belt on the assembly line. You cannot have different holes for the screws that the screws don't match because part A wasn't milled correctly. So they want to standardize human beings and human development, which means personalized recoding instructions to everybody's cells so that everybody follows the same program. And that's what this personalized medical therapy through vaccines may, in fact, want to do to us.
Yeah. So when you started talking about this, I'm like, all right, like this all makes sense. And it actually like solves some questions that I've had for like a really long time, right? Like it
Mm-hmm.
just does. Now, first of all, I've never heard of technetium before, but when I'm looking at technetium, I'm seeing little pieces of it that look remarkably like in similar shape, color, and size to implants that people who say they've been part of mind control programs or have been abducted by aliens have been finding and in some cases removing from their bodies for years, right?
Yeah, incredible observation. And thank you for teaching me the correct pronunciation. Like, Forrest Gump, I'm calling it technetium.
Maybe it is technetium, I don't know, but
No, I think you're right. Technetium sounds a lot better. Gives
so
it a pedigree.
right? So people, we've also been exposed to this in this people who look into those same things. A lot of times what they try and convince you of is when the mark of the beast comes, it's going to be like some little RFID chip, right? That looks a particular way. But you don't need an RFID chip actually if you have this metal in you that creates a radioactive field in the body, right? You know, especially
Right.
if you're into being able to use remote technologies. So this looks a lot closer to, I think, what people have pulled out of their bodies in this RFID chip that looks like a little capsule kind of thing that they keep trying to tell us it's going to be, right? When you keep people looking for a particular thing that's not it, they miss the thing that's already there that actually is it, right? So that's what I think. And then I'm seeing another pic. There's a few different versions of them here. And one of them is this shape that looks like, so several years back, before I really understood completely about the issues with vaccines, I did get a vaccine before I went to Africa, right? And
Mm-hmm.
this particular, I think I had got like 3 of them, right? This was back in like 2005, 6, something like that, right? So with one of them, I literally felt some sort of like metallic disc or something like slide down my arm inside, right? Like I
Oh.
almost envision it. And one of these pictures of technetium that I'm looking at, like I'm not saying that this is it, but intuitively when I look at it, I'm like, I bet it was that, right?
Yes. Now, just to give you some history, I'm reading straight from Wikipedia. Technetium is a chemical element with the symbol Tc and atomic number 43. It is the lightest element whose isotopes are all radioactive, none
Hmm.
of which are stable other than the fully ionized state of 97 Tc. Nearly all available technetium is produced as a synthetic element. Naturally occurring technetium is a spontaneous fission product in uranium ore and thorium ore, the most common source, or the product of neutron capture in molybdenum ores. The silvery gray crystalline transition metal lies between manganese and rhenium in group 7 of the periodic table, and its chemical properties are intermediate between those of both adjacent elements. All right, so this thing, Dmitry Mendeleev, who's a very famous early scientist, noted a gap in his periodic table and gave the undiscovered element the provisional name of eka-manganese. So in 1937, technetium became the first predominantly artificial element to be produced, hence its name from the Greek technotalk or whatever it is. I can't read. Craft or art, because those are Greek letters. That's why I can't read. Okay, so technetium, 1937 was when they produced it artificially. So it's been around long enough to have been experimented with in people as you're describing.
Yes. And remember, so the other thing that we're getting at the same time is this testing all the time, cryptocurrencies are rising, is all the propaganda about the UFOs and the coming alien invasion, right? And so if
Yeah.
people start popping up with these things in their body and the propaganda out there says that, oh, people who are alien abductees have this in their body, right? Well, then the message is, oh, well, it must come from that and not from some sort of medical device or procedure, or I can't read that one, you know, some sort of medical device or procedure or whatever, right? So it's interesting that we get these things all sort of, you know, clumped together, right? So,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I don't know if I should venture into the discussion about blockchain right now and uh, crypto, but you know that when I mentioned the Google behavioral ledger, I think we did an interview where we talked about that a little bit.
yep,
But all of our behavior is going to be prompted and input by us into our mobile device, because if we report it to Google or AI or whatever, it will be rewarded. We will be rewarded for picking the most sustainable choices.
yep,
So they want everybody to become sustainable, to do the things that are considered sustainable and appropriate. Sustainable is just code word for what they want you to do,
yep.
right? They're going to call it sustainable. So you'll get a dribble of Bitcoin for buying the right kind of pants or slippers or whatever you're doing the right kind of exercise. This is the smart world. The smart world will incentivize you and reward you with cryptocurrency for molding yourself to its specifications. So the more you depart from the individual real you into the our AI designed you,
Right.
which will be reflected by your digital twin, right?
Yep.
You're going to be rewarded for that. So your warm body is just something on this planet that will eventually live in a very tiny space, and it will be glued to its device, having its 2D adventures while you grow fatter or more pimply and sallow faced because you never see sunlight and you never do anything.
Right. So,
So,
okay. But
yeah. So I'll let you comment, and I'm going to draw out my the little explosive thing that I came up with the other day so that people get all, on the edge of their seats.
all
Go
right.
ahead.
So what you're talking about is true. And I think that whatever is going on here, like I think that, okay, so I'm going to tell you about another issue with these nasal swabs, right? And just that you brought this technetium to me, like in some ways is actually really helping me to kind of tie the loop and complete a thought on something. So maybe let's hit your thing first, and then I'm going to take you to this other idea of what could be going on with these tests and these swabs, and show you some stuff. And I actually think I can connect it back to this in a way that ties a loop and explains something interesting about something that I believe I experienced, and I've heard from a lot of other people as well. So go ahead with your long drawn out bomb that you're ready to drop.
No, I said I wanted to draw it out. Let's do your thing first.
Okay, so here we go. So I've told you before about, my past drug use and a lot of really strange things that I experienced during that time. Now, I understand that drug use can lead to strange experiences under any circumstance, right? But that makes it a perfect place to hide other experiences, right? So especially when you have a person who's used a drug for a certain amount of time, and then all of a sudden something about it changes, right? Like it isn't, generally when a person is just decreasing, like they're becoming, more unhealthy or more crazed or whatever, that's a process that happens, over time, right? It's not like, they're using drugs for a period of time and all of a sudden one day the experience of the drug changes 100% drastically, right? Kind of thing.
Yeah.
When they're using the same thing. So at a certain point, like I used methamphetamine on and off for many, many years. And at a certain point, I noticed that the experience began to change in terms of like, it just felt different. It moved from being like an analog type experience to a digital type experience. And I started to deteriorate in ways that were different than anything that had happened before, right? And I started to, my mind started doing different stuff. It started working differently. And I wouldn't say I didn't become dumb, right? During this period of time, I was doing tons of research. Lots of the things that I learned and the information and the skills that I developed are the same ones that I use to have these in-depth conversations with you. So I obviously hadn't lost my ability to think or reason. It almost seemed to be the opposite. Like I seemed to have heightened connectivity abilities. I seemed to be able to see, far into topics, like much farther than others did. But at the same time, I was in my bedroom, sitting on my couch, right, not moving, looking at my computer or my device or whatever I was doing research on, like in the same way that probably most people will do, but with not researching these topics, right? Like I was researching these topics while having the experience. So I also experienced a lot of like what I didn't ever really know if it was Morgellons, because a lot of the things that, people, like when I would go looking for pictures online and stuff, a lot of things that people were showing weren't really exactly what I was experiencing. But the things that I was experiencing and the things that were coming out of my skin, there was enough crossover that I was like, okay, well, maybe. And every once in a while, I'd fall onto something. I'm like, that's more like it. That's it. But there would never be a lot of information available about that, or very many other people who were having that kind of thing. Right. And so I always noted away in my head that this is what it was really, this is what it was. And maybe one day I'll get to know. I couldn't find any information on what I was pulling out of my skin per se. Right. So a few months ago, or maybe it was about 8 weeks ago now, I was on rents.com. I check there every once in a while, right? It's a very, I have a lot of mixed feelings about some of the stuff provided there, but every once in a while you find something there that you don't find other places. And doesn't mean it is not true, but if what you find there resembles something that you know about, right? Well, then you're kind of onto something. So I popped up these two articles, and I'm going to share my screen with you so I can show you what I'm talking about. Okay. And these articles were about that. Basically, I think what they were trying to say was like, it's actually like, forget about the vaccine. It's the test that is containing, the mark of the beast, or the things that are bad, or the implants, or the chips, or whatever. Right. So I'm going to screen share with you right now. And let's see, here we go. Can you see?
Well, I have to enlarge my Zoom. I think this is it. Okay, come on. Yes, 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 yes.
So basically, these articles, and there were, medical papers attached to it at the bottom, like that you can connect to, right? Like from PubMed and different places. But basically, it was saying that the swabs that they're sticking up the nose, right, contain these little particles on them. And when you look deeply under it, it's this. And then they were showing you what this technology is. They were showing you the patent for it and all this kind of stuff. So you see this thing here that looks kind of like a star.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it looks like there's pieces of metal, and then it looks like they're kind of held together with something that's more clear, right? So
Mm-hmm.
all of those little pieces and particles that you see, right, that are held together by the clear stuff, right? Like I used to pull pieces of all of those shapes out of my skin, and also would pull broken up pieces of the clear thing that's behind it, almost like it's some kind of silicone or something that's holding it together, right? I never pulled out anything that looked like the whole star, but all of these pieces were there, right? And this was during a period of time where I was doing methamphetamine and I was inhaling it through my nose, right? So they're talking in this article about how the nasal passageway is actually the best way to deliver a vaccine. So there are a lot of, so this idea is that the test is actually the vaccine, right? And it contains, so like when somebody, your stupid normie friend says, oh, New York Times wrote an article, there's no microchip in Bill Gates's vaccine, right? Okay, so like maybe the test is where it is, right? So, okay, I'm suspicious of these things, but what is being shown here is literally exactly the things that were coming out of my body. And I was doing methamphetamine through my nose, and it burns just like the people say these tests burn terribly, right? And it delivers, like, I think there's a quote here where it talks about the engineer, there's a quote here that talks about how nasal entry is like the best direct path right to the brain, right? Better than anything else, okay? And so I would have this, but I also had this technology includes with it something called TheraGrip. Okay, so here they're talking about intended for direct nose to brain delivery, right? And it also talks about how there's this technology that it is that's called TheraGrip. Let me find this thing about TheraGrip. Where did it go? Hold on a second. It's here somewhere. Therapeutics. I think it's the stuff with the star strip here. TheraGrippers, right?
Yeah.
They don't rely on electricity, wireless signals, or external controls. Instead, they operate like small compressed springs with a temperature-triggered coating on the devices that releases the stored energy autonomously at body temperature. And so when it grips, it does this. It wraps around something like
Oh,
that, okay?
yeah, yeah.
I literally have had the situation where, like, I was trying to pull something out of my face. I feel like embarrassed even saying this, but I think it's important for understanding, right? Where like I would go to try and pull something out off my skin and it wouldn't come off, Sophia. It would grab on for dear life, almost exactly like that, right? Like I could not pull it off. So if I got one of these things, I think that they don't last forever. I think they dissolve over time. And that's when I would get the little pieces coming out individually, or maybe something didn't get up to correctly, right? But if they were still active, they were grabbing on like this, right? And so, because I was looking for all the individual pieces instead of something together like this, right? Like I was looking like for, slightly triangular, pointy shaped piece of silicon, odd, capsule shaped piece of metal kind of thing, right? Like I wasn't finding it because it's all one thing. And I'm sure you remember, like, from when you were doing your talks on chemtrails and Morgellons, and I think it was also in the movie that Max Egan made about this stuff. Like he showed how there was these things that closed around like certain like junction points or synapses, right? Like in the body or brain or whatever kind of thing. And this would be kind of that, right? So think about this. When you have a methamphetamine addict, they're putting it up their nose every day. You now have people getting something that really burns and stings, just like meth, stuck up their nose every day so that they can go to work, right? And so it's a constant delivery system of these little technologies that will dissolve possibly and exit your body over time, right? But that are there and being basically operating in your system, right? And so, with all the remote technologies, and especially if you have some of that technetium on there too, or even if the technetium actually comes through the thing that we think of the traditional vaccine that is creating a radioactive field in your body. So like those, little particles are being, activated in some other way than only just your body temperature too. And we have 5G and Internet of Bodies and Internet of Things and everything all wired up. There can be a constant flow of information into, because they've already said that just having a vaccine isn't going to make masking and testing and all that kind of stuff go away, right? So
Right.
during the period of time where they're trying to figure this stuff out, this constant ability to monitor. So imagine, so I was doing drugs, right? And that's a perfect population to test on, because if people are acting weird or acting crazy or acting like zombies, well, it's because they're on drugs, right? But during
Right.
that period of time, I experienced very odd things with my body, right? Like sometimes I would like lose a lot of weight, which would be like what you would imagine with someone on meth, right? That they wouldn't eat and they'd lose a lot of weight. But other times it was almost like I would wake up one day and it was like I looked really weird and thick and fat and heavy and whatnot. Like if they can literally change our, body's chemistry by some of this, right? To do different things and slow down metabolism, speed up metabolism, monitoring brain function. Now, for me, during this period of time, I also experienced a lot of strange stuff in my sleep where it almost felt like, and I've told you about this before, like there was an operating system or something was running, right? Like, well, maybe they were even mining cryptocurrencies using the massive amount of energy needed being generated from my body, because Bill Gates has a patent for that too, right? Like using the body's functions to mine cryptocurrencies, right? I mean, I sometimes would wake up in the middle of the night and my blood would feel like it was boiling and I had so much energy, I felt like I could climb Mount Everest, right? Like out of a dead sleep, feel like that, right? And so I don't know what this is, but when I saw this, I was like, that is the thing that I was looking for all of those years ago. And the way the technology works, I'll send you this article when we get off, and I'll post it for people, in the comment, in the description section, so they can read it. Like, to me, this is fascinating, right? And this is this is the way that they say is good for getting people to comply, right? Like nasal delivery of vaccination or medication has a higher compliance rate than puncturing the skin. So think about how many people who would never accept a shot every day have been accepted having a swab stuffed up their nose every day.
Yeah, of course.
So do you see the
Wow.
comparison I'm drawing here between like the mat, right? So that's a perfect group to experiment with. You can rely on the fact that they're going to be sticking that stuff up their nose at least almost every day, if not every day. So you can monitor the same group of people consistently, right? And especially if you're providing those sets of drugs to people, are giving them out and you're tracking people because there's shit in their body that you can track them through. You can keep track of all of this stuff. And if anybody ever said, like I was crazy enough to do, I think something weird like this might be happening, well, you can just chalk it up to this person is crazy and they're on drugs.
Yes. No, but all those headlines, nano emulsion based intranasal drug delivery brain, you just scrolled past it.
Yeah.
But the saquinavir mesylate for brain targeting. Come on, the words aren't hidden. The words are right there.
Right there, right? I mean,
There's one title that's hydrogel. I mean, these are all, it looks like these are different articles, but they're
so,
grouped together.
right. So
Yes, they can vaccinate us through nasal test swabs and target the brain. That's
and then researchers engineer tiny machines that deliver medicine efficiently,
yeah.
right? And then the next one is nano neurotherapeutics approach intended for direct nose to brain delivery. Now, one of the things that happened during this period of time is like I would have all these sores on my skin from this stuff coming out, but my skin would heal incredibly quickly, like almost momentarily in some cases, but certainly faster than like a normal wound that you had wide open on your skin, right? So I don't know if they were also testing some kind of other therapeutics through this, right? Nanoemulsion, that you already said that one, right? There was that one, right? Hydrogel nanoparticles and nanocomposites for nasal drug vaccine delivery. So it's not just for drugs, it's also for vaccines. They've been experimenting with it both, right? And to what you were talking about, like, see this right here? Have you ever seen anything like this from any of the pictures that people would send you with the Morgellons?
Yes, lots of hexagonal shapes.
Right?
And then the clawing and the not letting go, people told
Yep.
me that they would have to yank with tweezers, and
Yep.
it would be very difficult to get these pieces off them.
Yep.
And then the stuff that dissolves would probably be a kind of biofilm that had a certain
But
lifetime, or longevity.
one of the things that was weird about these sores, so sometimes you see up here, like this, the clearer paper behind, there's like a sharp point right there.
Yes.
When that little piece, like let's say it broke off or dissolved, but I get this little piece a lot and it hurt coming out. It felt like a dagger was coming through my skin, right?
Yes, people have said that. Those little sharp,
Yep.
sharp, almost metallic. Yeah,
Right.
definitely.
And when I would sometimes have these sores, they behaved very differently than the others in terms of how they healed, but also the blood that was coming out of them didn't feel like regular blood. It was like gelatin. It was
Yeah.
like gel or goo. And if this is some kind of hydrogel thing, right? Like, I mean, to me, this answered so many questions that I just like, I was like, this has to be this has to be fake, but it's not. And these are all, scholarly papers that have been written by doctors about these that you can kind of connect to. These things have been published on PubMed many years ago, right? But by 2016, I was clean and I had cleaned up my body and my diet. And so I wasn't looking so hard anymore. I had found that when I stopped looking for answers, that problem seems to, to go away in some ways, right? And, I just couldn't believe it. So for me, like, what I think I don't know if the test is the vaccine or the vaccine is the vaccine, but this testing every day provides a constant ability to upload these designed chips that carry medicine or instructions or whatever for things with brain function and all that stuff that you're talking about and that you talked about with Greg and whatnot. Like, to me, this like closes the loop on a lot of it. So it's not only important for people to resist the vaccine, but also the test, right? Like, I think that like our common sense of that, like, if we don't think we have an illness, why would we test for it? Right, kind of things. Now, the other thing I want to say about this and get your thoughts. First of all, I want to shut up for a second and let you say anything you'd like to say about all that I just vomited out.
Well, I want to talk about what they're calling the vaccine for a second. I think you're exactly right. The test is introducing something into your body. It could be these materials, or let's call synthetic parasites that have a job to do.
Mm-hmm.
And it could be the technetium as well that maps your brain. And when
Mm-hmm.
you walk by the scanner in the future, they will have a, bluish outline of your brain, and a lot of data will flood in
Yep.
by 6G methodologies or whatever. And I also think that the mRNA vaccine, with its protein recoding instructions,
Mm-hmm.
I want people to appreciate for a minute what proteins do. I'm going to use an analogy here that's very simple and very crude, but let's say you want to build a house and you have a particular kind of house in mind and you find the perfect architect and you pay him and you say, look, I want you to design a house for me and here's the money for the plans, and then we'll get a contractor, a general contractor, a builder to build a house. So that you pay the architect and he comes up with, this wizardry design, wizard-like design, wonderful design. And you say, that's it. That's exactly the house of my dreams. And then you go off and get a builder, general contractor, and he comes in with a bunch of subcontractors, who do different things. There'll be a roofer, there'll be a drywall guy, framing guy, tile, brick, all this. And then those subcontractors, they have crews of workmen, and the workmen use materials to build the house. So proteins in the body are everything I just described.
Mm-hmm.
They are the materials that you build the body with. They are the trucks and transport mechanisms to get those materials from one place to another. They are the work crews. They are the supervisors of the crews. And so they build the body. They do the whole thing. And so if you give the body instructions to make proteins differently, let's call this non-human protein synthesis, what are you going to get as a result? Are you going to get that if that architect, if this builder changes out everything, changes out the types of materials he uses, the people he uses, the supervisors he uses, the companies he uses, are you going to get that house that you paid for? No. Are you going to get, if all the materials that the body is told to make are completely different, they depart from normal human protein synthesis, are you going to end up being Homo sapien?
Yeah, no, I mean, no, like if everything is constantly being, recoded, just like, rebuilding your house, you get like, you decide you're switching from, copper pipes to whatever, right? Some other kind of pipes, or, you used to have, houses used to be really well made when people like built stuff themselves, and now everything is mass produced and whatnot, and just, logged in. And I especially am thinking of like these 3D printed tiny houses that people are starting to do, right?
Yes.
Like it's a similar kind of thing. I've also read an article, and I'm not 100% comfortable with the source of the article, so like I worry about thinking in that way, but it certainly makes sense to me as a reasonable idea that that's part of that's their intellectual property, whatever protein that they're coding for these new proteins. So then you have a protein in your body, right? Your body received a set of instructions. It's like you can go online and buy from a tiny house company. You can buy a tiny house, or you can buy their instructions, their blueprints to create your own, right? And they'll
Yes.
sell you those, right? So this is kind of the same thing, right? Like they're giving your cells a set of instructions to build this protein. Does that enable them to intellectual property over do they own your cells then?
Well, that's it too. Right. A very good point. Are you then in partnership with them because your body is synthesizing and creating things that are patented that they designed?
Right. Right. So you then have some kind of little, encoded type thing, right? Some type of little, and we hear things about there's going to be like the quantum dot or some kind of little barcode inside of you. I don't think it even has to be that, like that order, like, right? If there is some sort of synthetic protein that does not occur in nature in your body, and this particular company has the patent on that, right? Then, it's kind of like the same thing with when the GMO seeds, fly over into the organic farm, and then Monsanto comes and sues the organic farm.
Okay, and I did report about that in my most recent newsletter. That story did not go down the way we've been told. It's a huge surprise.
Okay. All right.
Tracy Schmeiser. If we have time, I'll get into that in the second hour. But the idea is right that yes, there is then a patent infringement created by you, and not knowing the law is not an excuse, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So
Go ahead.
yeah, so this is, I mean, your body is being told not just how to make one protein differently, but how to make all the proteins differently, which then remember that proteins are the materials you build with. They are the builders. They are the buses and the trucks and the tractors and the everything that, well, not buses necessarily, but the vehicles. They are the supervisors. They are everything. They do everything in the body.
Yep. So then the other thing that I wanted to just, and this kind of ties everything right back into your Internet of Bodies, blockchain, cryptocurrency, social credit kind of thing. So there is a different test that doesn't involve leaving anything in your body, and that's a spit test, right? That's a spit test that tests for antigens. But the issue with that one is it costs $119, and not every place accepts that one, even though that is actually more accurate in terms of really representing whether you have something or don't have something in the PCR test, right? So like if going forward, like to have jobs or to go to work or whatever, you're going to have to test every day, and they'll offer you the PCR one for free or cheap or even not only free, but if you do it, you'll get, $5 worth of Bitcoin, right? Or whatever their USD coin or the fucking Goldman Sachs coin or whatever it is, right? And you're going to have to take these tests regularly. I don't know too many people who would be willing to drop $119 a day to pay for their own test, and it might not even be accepted anyway, right? So
Yeah.
like when you have these things are all happening at the same time, right? And so like this idea that everything to me that has been going on for certainly the last year, but certainly probably 5 or 10 or more years, is about penetration into your space, right? Whether it be 5G, whether it be through vaccination or other kinds of inoculations, or anything. It's like, whenever the tradition, and you'll like this because of your military analogy with the viruses and stuff like that, right? Like it used to be that armies invaded other countries, right? And they took over land and they took over territory and whatever. Now it's all just about like invasion of the cells, invasion of your actual skin with a vaccine, or invasion of your house with these frequencies coming in, invasion into your cells with these mRNA vaccines that penetrate the cell wall. And of course, people have had their cell walls weakened through, not consuming proper fats and things like that, right? Like this penetration into layers that you're not supposed to be into is the new warfare. That's the new battleground. It isn't like stealing land from, the other guys like it used to be, although that comes as a result of this other penetration, right? But, letting things into, like, your body is your body and has skin and cell walls and all that kind of stuff for a reason. People aren't supposed to jam things up your nose. Like the only thing that's supposed to be jammed up your nose is your pinky finger if you're 3, right? Like, this whole thing of allowing people into your own space, your own body, your own cells, your own mind, in this way that's where the battleground is.
Right. Well, the earth has been charted and bought and sold and is plundered, and now biology has to be charted, bought, sold, and plundered. And there's an infinite amount of biology to do that to, because it's always being recreated.
Mm-hmm. And our bodies are like small versions of the universe, right? So the things that they've used by penetrating outer areas are a map for the inner and vice versa. So they're constantly using like things they learn in one domain and taking them into another domain, right? And I wanted to also comment, I wanted to say this before and I forgot, about what you said about how California would be a brand and Texas would be a brand, and Oklahoma has so much crazy stuff going on in there. I could go on all day. Don't get me started. But this was a first exercise in massively branding something that no one thought of as a branded thing before, right? COVID-19 is a brand.
Yeah.
Right. And so people have readily accepted that something that used to be thought of as just a natural thing now has like a brand and a title name, and it's different. Like it's kind of like if you just got some generic tennis shoes when you were little, you weren't as cool as the person who got Nikes, right?
Right.
So, like, nobody cares about if you have the flu or a cold, but if you had COVID-19, right? Well, then they can get paid a lot of money for that, and you can, tell some story about how you survived it, and it's crazy. So I think that like this was also in that mind control propaganda space, an amazing exercise in getting people to buy, to, just like, seeds being branded before this and whatever, that natural functions or things that seem like they would not be subject to branding, that's the way it's going to be now.
Yeah, Emily, COVID-19 is a false paradigm.
Totally.
That's what it is, that people have bought into.
Yep.
Emotionally, and now they're buying into it tactically, logistically. I mean, it's a false paradigm that was brilliantly designed and really had an effect almost overnight.
Yep.
It's an invitation. COVID-19 is a terrain that doesn't even exist except in people's minds.
Yep.
In the public mind, it exists. And it has allowed them to, let loose a lot of different strategies that they would have had a much harder time installing and launching without this paradigm without people buying the paradigm.
Yeah.
So should we go to the second hour, do you think?
Yeah.
Because I want to talk about Percy Schmeiser. I was just looking at the clock, and I think we started at about an hour ago, but I
Let's
don't.
do that. Let's wrap up the public hour. Why don't you tell people where they can find your work and your products?
Yes, I would love to invite people to my store, avatarproducts.com. Now, it doesn't have anything to do with digital avatars. Those didn't even exist when I took this name, or at least they didn't exist in my knowledge. And if on the right side of the store, there is a little icon, and you will see somebody known to Emily there. It's modeling one of my masks, my useless placebo masks. And now there's, these are breathable, organic cheesecloth masks that are very lightweight, and they are very functional. They wash very well. You can keep them a long time. And if you have to wear a mask somewhere, you might as well have it on your face with the label on it that says useless placebo, so you can educate people. And then you also have choices of COVID zombie or what's the other one? Walking biohazard. So there's lots of other stuff in the store. We just brought in some amazing soaps that you can use on your body. They last much longer than conventional soaps. My soap maker friend who moved to Sonoma, he is the one that makes them. And I've been trying them out myself. And there's some really cool ones. There's pine tar, and that might scare people away, but pine tar is the sap that
Mhm.
they get from the trunk of the stumps of pine trees that are cut down. And I'm also going to be bringing in gum turpentine and pine rosin and some of the more adventurous types of soaps that appeal to guys, I have to say, as well as some outdoor types of people that you feel really, really clean. But I have lots of the gentle ones there. We've got tea tree, spearmint, all different orange lavender or whatever it's, sorry, orange oatmeal, and lavender rose is really nice. So I started with some tame ones, but I'm going to bring in the more adventurous ones very, very soon.
I love the adventurous stuff. And I also like all the men's products. Like I like the men's smells very much, So leave it to the person who takes us on adventures in our minds to take us on some adventures with her products as well. So
Yeah, thank you. Well, yeah, Emily, I'll send you some of that soap to try. We'll definitely send you gum turpentine,
all
some of
right.
the ugly sounding stuff.
All right. So that's going to wrap up the first hour. You can join us at patreon.com/Off Planet Media for part 2, where we are going to meander about a variety of different topics in much the same fashion we did here in the first hour. We'll see you guys over there. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.